Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Lucy O'Hagan, the founder of Wild Awake Ireland. Lucy is quite simply one of the most kind-hearted, intriguing, and inspiring people I've had the pleasure to meet. During our conversation, she shares her journey, which is beautifully woven with her love of nature. A relationship that began from a need for sanctuary from the challenges of life and has blossomed into a life where she consciously awakens a deeper relationship with the world, rooted in reciprocity, reverence, and responsibility in both her own life, but also the experiences of the many people she works with and guides to their own remembering. Our conversation gently meanders through her wisdom of ancestral skills, ceremonial rites of passage, and wildlife tracking, and the richness these threads can bring to the tapestry of life. We also hold space for the grief and pain so many of us are experiencing in this time, and celebrate the importance of looking to the richness and resilience to be found in the edges, so we can move away from polarisation towards embracing the incredible diversity of voices in our own communities and in the natural world. Lucy offers up the sacred invitation to us all to deeply listen, witness each other's stories, to find the courage to sit with the questions and challenges of our time and dream into the new world that we believe is possible, whilst remembering to trust that most people genuinely have good intentions and truly want to do something to help. Welcome, Lucy, and thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation as you are absolutely fascinating, and I've been following you for quite a few years, so I'm really excited to learn more about your story and share that with people.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, perfect. No problem. I just get started with my guests by asking them to share a little bit about their nature story. So just really whatever nature means to you or has meant to you through your life. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share to get us started.
Thank you for this question. Yeah, it's really curious because I suppose since I've been doing this work and that it's garnered attention, this is a question I get asked all of the time. And I was reflecting this morning on what a gift it is to be asked the same question like over many, many years, because it's never the same answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think that's a real gift to keep like circling around to the same what is like essentially at the core of my work, at the core of my life, but that like my relationship changes to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always kind of there's always the core starting point, which I suppose is childhood for me, and I grew up in Belfast in the north of Ireland.
Oh,
And
wow.
I grew up in the city, but in the place where I lived, there was a lot of access to green spaces. So nature for me was kind of the hedges between the houses
Yeah.
and the
Okay.
little cluster of trees at the bottom of the garden. And I was driving past somewhere recently that I'd played as a child and was just thinking how incredible it was that, yeah, just that capacity to create
Yeah.
such a world in those places, like the
I love
capacity
that.
of a, oh,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful,
I
isn't
think
it?
there's quite a few of my guests have had a similar sort of more urban upbringing, and I love that you still find nature, because I think there's a lot of sort of talk that people in cities are really struggle to be connected to nature, but actually there are these little pockets, aren't there, of it that are there for you, and it can inspire this lifelong passion that
Yeah.
evolves over time.
Absolutely. And it's like that kind of untamed wildness of childhood, isn't it? That
Yeah.
you have access to such an imagination to be able to create these pockets of magic in the smallest places. And
Yeah.
I think in my life and what I'm always hoping to inspire in people is to come back to that a little bit, that we still have and can tend to that capacity in ourselves, regardless of our age, that we don't assume that nature or wildness stops at the boundaries of a city, or that, like, yeah, it's so funny, like how I always think it's such a simple thing to say that, like, connection to the earth is like doesn't stop at the city, or is like as much as having a conversation with somebody, because we are all of the earth. It feels so simple, and yet
Yeah.
it's so telling how profound even that concept is for us now, like how detached we've come from this idea, or this truth,
Yeah.
this truth that
Yeah.
everything comes from the earth and that we are all nature. Anyway, I digress.
No, no,
um,
not at all. It is true though, isn't it? I think there is just this huge sense of disconnect, and I think that's what's so important about some of the work that you're doing is this amazing movement that you're creating to help people find their connection back to nature and the earth and the rhythms of the seasons and just life in general, isn't it?
mm. Yeah, and I mean, if I circle back to like your original question, like, so I was brought up in Belfast, and then we moved to a rural town in County Down, which is another county in the north of Ireland, and it was a very sectarian area, and my where I at that time, the home that I was in was very, very rural and very abusive, and so for me, like, going out into nature was my sanctuary, it
Yeah,
was the place that I went to
that's
feel
safe.
safe.
Yeah,
And whenever you grow up with that kind of relationship with nature, it kind of seeds, well, I suppose I don't take it for granted that, like, I didn't harden because of that experience, that, like, I still was able to remain soft and open and vulnerable,
yeah,
because I know for so many people that's not the story. But for me, it seeded this responsibility of, like, oh my gosh, this is how nature took care of me, and how can I give that back? Like, how can I be in reciprocity with that which has taken care of me and saved my life, on
yeah,
so many different occasions, that's just been a constant in my life of anytime there's, yeah, like the grief of the world, like the pain of being alive
yeah,
in these times, like that's there, that I know that, like, this morning I went out for a walk on the beach here, and it's like, oh my God, like, I can just open myself to the vastness of
yeah,
this great mystery, and turn back towards life again, and remember, like, what it means to be alive, and the responsibility of that, and the care that I receive
yeah,
from this, like, wider, more than human world. So yeah, it's a great responsibility, and I approach my work in that way, that I really don't take it for granted that I
yeah.
get to go and, like, I was sitting by the fire with somebody recently, and they were cooking some wild food on the fire, and I was just like, I love my job so much, like, it's so
Oh,
ridiculous.
it's so
It's like,
beautiful.
because it's my life, and I get to
Yeah,
do that what I love, and yeah, like, there is such a hunger for it, and people respond so well to it, because it touches such a deep need within all of us to
yeah,
connect, not just with nature, like as if it's separate, but also, ourselves, and with each other, and, like, just essentially learn how to be human again.
yeah. I think there's so much of what you talked about there that I think a lot of people probably can resonate with, the fact that nature is a place that a lot of people find that safety, don't they? It's free of
Mm.
judgment. You're not, you feel really held when you're there, when you're going through troubled times and difficult things. And you're right, it's lovely that you said that it kept the softness in you, and
Mm.
it's allowed you to become who you are now, despite the challenges that you faced. And I love that you are doing that. I think there was three words that you said on your website, sort of the three R's: reciprocity, renewal, and reverence. And I think
Mm.
they're words that just echo through nature, aren't they? And it's just at the core of the relationship I think when you do get that deep connection with nature, you feel, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's really, like at the moment we're sitting in this time of Samhain, so like that time of like that we're just always reconnected back to these cycles of life.
Yeah.
I mean, and I always say like, and we always feel, and we don't always feel this, and like the culture that we live in now, it really uproots us from that connection, from that
Yeah.
living cyclically, like from that ability to like winter, like, oh my gosh, like what a privilege for me to be able to take a breath in this time and to really feel into what is this time of year inviting of me, what is it that I need to shed, let go of so that I can like renew myself in the spring again, like I don't take it for granted. Um, and yet it's like I think when we are disconnected from this way of living that I know that my ancestors, that our ancestors were so intimately connected to,
Mm.
um it's there's such a sickness in us, like there's such an unwellness in us when we're not able to rest, um
That's a
yeah, I
big thing,
feel
I think,
very,
isn't it? Rest is
yeah,
a huge thing. We're so conditioned to, we've got to be busy and striving and in this sort of perpetual, I guess, seasonally sort of summer, almost sort of harvest
yeah,
time, isn't it? Of like constant production. And actually we've lost the messages of like you said, the winter season, the autumn, the
yeah.
shedding, the darkness, the coming back to yourself. They're important lessons for us, aren't they? It's that time of reflection. And I mean, there's something that you often talk about is that although yours the focus for a lot of people is their connection to nature, actually the byproduct of that is a reconnection to themselves as well. And that's equally as important, isn't it, as having that time to reconnect to yourself.
Massively, massively. Yeah, that's it's a really strong thread through all of my work. Yeah, that ultimately that does kind of that change does begin within, in connection with other people, in connection with community. And that's why I've been so passionate about bringing people together in this way, like exploring all the different threads that question why it is that we've been disconnected in this way, like what has happened and what do we do with that, like how do we sit in this kind of thick present that we're in together and dream into a new world that like we believe is possible,
Yeah.
um and yeah, like that's,
I
yeah,
think
it's
I
just
think
been
that's
such
the
a
key,
gift
isn't it?
to,
It's
yeah,
um it's very easy to get stuck in the sort of despair of where we are, isn't it? And that sort of it's heavy energy at the moment, and sort of think, what hope is there? How do we move forward? And I
mm-hmm.
love the fact that you say quite often the importance of community, and I think that's that's something that's been lost a lot in our culture as well, hasn't it? And ancestrally, your community was part of your survival, really, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 completely. um yeah, I mean there's so much in what you just said there. I think it's very easy, like as you say, to get caught in despair. And I also, I really make space for that, like I really make space for the grief and the rage and the despair and the sorrow that like comes with being alive, particularly at the moment, like with all that's happening in Gaza and in so many parts of the world. It's like, okay, we haven't lost our capacity to feel, and that's so important,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, all of those human emotions are so needed at this time. Like that's what propels us into action. It's what propels us into, you know, as you say, like reaching out to our community who's here, like who can help. At least we hope that that's what it can do, but so often it's like there's a huge desensitization to like what's happening in the world, which I recognize as another kind of survival strategy, because
Yeah.
actually to take it all in,
It's
it's
sort of
so overwhelming.
a trauma response, isn't it? Of, a
Exactly.
sort of a freeze kind of, it's too much to bear,
Yeah,
which is completely understandable. Like you said, it's
yeah.
it's finding that way to cope with that. And I think nature again supports us there as well, doesn't it? It's
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there's that co-regulation that needs to happen, like not just our own kind of self-soothing and the tools that we might have for that, but also in relationship with other people and in relationship with the earth, which is, like to be able to go outside and just feel your feet on the ground, or for me this morning, just to watch the waves. It's like that's so regulating for our nervous system. It's so it really invites a kind of change of movement within ourselves.
yeah,
Like I'm never the same if I go for a swim in the sea. I'm
yeah,
always laughing. It's like you come
yeah,
out of the sea and it's like it's never a bad idea. It's
yeah,
never a bad idea. But to get in, is such a difficult thing. But
yeah.
yeah, it's like it can shift so much in us. And I just keep coming back to this question of like, oh, how do we be in reciprocity with that? Like how do we really show up in ways that is restorative, that like is in reverence, that is like invites that responsibility and that eventual renewal as well.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation, isn't it? It's a constant conversation of both with yourself and what you need, and with nature, but also with the communities around us, and a respect for the diversity of I mean, we talk about the natural world, and we're having this biodiversity crisis, but and that's the strength of nature, isn't it? Is the diversity and
Mm.
how everything is intricately woven. And it's like we need that in our communities as well, don't we?
Yeah,
Our
yeah,
human communities, as we come together to embrace our diversity and all our ideas, and that's how we form strength and grow and have, can make a difference.
yeah, massively. I've been really so in my local town here, it's in the Gaeltacht in Donegal, which means that it's a place where the Irish language is still spoken as the first
Oh,
language of the
fantastic.
people here. Oh, it's very special. Um, and we have the first ever Gaeltacht Pride in
Yeah.
Ireland. So it's called Broad na Gaeltachta. And as part of that, I've been running workshops called Wild Queer, so exploring queerness in nature and like the the biological exuberance of life. And I've just found that like so special because it really like amplifies like what you're saying of there's just so much diversity in nature, and there's not this kind of binary thinking that this particular culture that we live in now really pushes. It's so much more magical than we could ever
Yeah.
even imagine. Like there's so much going on. There's so many different ways that life expresses itself. And I like for me it stretches so much beyond like, LGBTQ culture and living, but it's like just for everything. Like we're so we're so beautifully diverse,
Yeah.
and I just really want to celebrate that and like shine a light on that because, yeah, I know even for myself, it's like, so how many times I've made myself small or tried to fit into something like a particular box, or how many times like I've held like shame over my body or my sexuality or my gender, and it's like, oh my gosh, like the natural world is mirroring to me that all of this is just the way it is,
Yeah.
like that there's just so much beauty and diversity.
Yeah, no, there is. It's just, and I think that's part of coming home to nature, isn't it, as well, is what it can. I mean, I think people feel like it's all about nature, but actually it's this beautiful ripple effect that like goes out into the community. And it's like if you can care for nature, which hasn't got a voice, then
Yeah.
you're gonna care more for the people in your community as well, and the vulnerable and the diversity, because you want to nurture everything. And that's
Yeah.
what I mean, that was part of why I called my podcast what I did, Nurtured by Nature, because it was this idea that like nature can nurture us, but at the same
Mhm.
time like we nurture nature, and it's this beautiful cycle of giving and receiving,
Yeah.
and
That's
yeah.
such a beautiful, yeah. That's such a beautiful invitation, Fiona, because I think that's something that's so missing is like, yeah, there's often this one-way narrative of, well, we're helping the trees or we're, doing this for nature, but actually like when we consider our role in it and, we miss nature, we miss having these wild places and they miss us as
Yeah,
well, because we are a part of it and we've strayed away,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like, well, how do we come to remember ourselves as a part of nature? How do we remember our human niche in all of this
yeah,
and take that place again, and I really yeah, there's just so many different pathways to like reconnect with that remembering, um like from ceremony to ancestral skills to like languages to
yeah.
the Celtic wheel or poetry or story or just going out and walking out. It's just like there's so many different ways, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean I think just before we started talking, I said to Lucy, I was like, I could speak to you for hours because there's just so much
There's
we
so
can
much.
cover. And I think you've just put it into words beautifully there. But maybe we touch a little bit on your ancestral skills because I think that's something that's quite sort of I wouldn't say unique to you, but it's quite a strong thread in your journey. And
Mm,
I think what sort of I like is that you were talking about the niche in nature, and I think that ancestral skills play quite key into that, don't they? Of
mm,
this sort of I don't know, we've gone so out of balance with nature, haven't we, now that there's this sort of feeling that we need to like protect it at all costs, but then we're sort of almost not having that relationship with it as well that you would have ancestrally had of, you would have
mm,
used certain plants and harvest them, and there would have been this sort of sacred harvest, wouldn't there? Awareness of what you're taking and how you're taking it. But there was,
mm,
this it was a two-way relationship, wasn't there? Of it, like you said, it needed us and we needed it,
mm,
and that's some of the stuff that you deal with quite a lot in your work, isn't
mm,
it?
mm. I think I want to start by like really honoring my teachers because I mean we've spoken so much about like nature as yes
Yeah,
this generous teacher, but I also have like some very human
yeah,
teachers. So like John Ryder from the Woodcraft School in Sussex was just an incredible, it still continues to be an incredible teacher to me, particularly in the realms of ethnobotany and wildlife tracking and trailing. And then a woman called Lynx Filden, who is just, I mean, if you mention ancestral skills, she's just a superstar, like
yeah,
she's really an incredible person and so gifted and so giving of all that she's amassed over her life, all that she's learned. So I'm just very fortunate to have had such amazing teachers who have really, yeah, gathered together all of this knowledge and wisdom and then share it in that way. Um, so yeah, when I sort of came across ancestral skills for the first time in this kind of way, so those, I was very involved in kind of bushcraft and that way of approaching the earth. And that was one of my apart that and forest school were like my big entry into this. Um, and then when I met Lynx and had my first experience with her, it was kind of like somebody had just pulled back the the veil of like all of it. I was like, oh, this is why
yeah,
this is so important and why I love it so much. And it doesn't matter that I can make a bow drill fire in like 10 minutes if I'm alone in the woods, with nobody to do it with. It's like the community and all that that comes with is so much at the core of this. But certainly, ancestral skills being like those skills of our long ago ancestors, so using the materials of stone and bone and plant fiber and animal skin and plant and yeah, by extension of that, like the movement of the animals across the earth, wildlife tracking, the movement of the stars across the sky, the stories that we create. It's kind of, to me, it's about building culture. It's about like rebuilding regenerative culture. Um, And there's something very humbling about it because, whenever you tan an animal hide using only bone or stone tools, you really appreciate a knife, like you really
Yeah.
kind of are like, oh, right, okay, this is where we've come from. And it's not that we were, these kind of quote unquote primitive, backwards people, it's like our ancestors were so incredible, like
Yeah.
really just like to have lived on the earth for so long, in relationship with the earth for so long, and to have, co-evolved with so many things. Like it's just it's kind of amazing that we've lived here for so long,
Yeah.
and only had like such a beautiful and like yeah, our impact has been regenerative, like and I really feel that in my bones whenever I'm practicing ancestral skills, when I'm creating fire with sticks, or if I'm tanning an animal hide, or weaving a basket, or like, just going out to pick some nettles. I'm like, how long have our hands been doing this? Like how many like hearts and bodies and minds has this information been passed through to reach me? And I keep coming back to this responsibility piece, but it's like I have to pass this on, like I have to
Yeah.
share this with people. Like this has been, the result of love of thousands of people, and here it is in my body now, and what will I do with that? So yeah, I think for me, like ancestral skills is it kind of embeds me into the web of life,
Yeah.
because I'm very acutely attuned to what it takes to make a fire, or you know I don't flint knap. I'm like just I've tried it. It's really hard. I'm like, somebody else can do that. Not everybody did everything in the village.
Yeah.
But like if I get a flint tool and then I'm using that to like, scrape a hide, it's like, wow, it's really hard work, and it takes time, and it takes devotion. And it takes like slowness. Like there's a real act of needing to slow down and be present with the materials, and just even the sounds, the smells, the tastes, like they're so ancient,
Yeah.
like the feeling of things. It's like that's what our hands have evolved to touch. Like that's what my nose has evolved smelling. Like this is the movement that my body has evolved doing. And yeah, it's just so humbling and so connective, and I really, really love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, can
Yeah,
you tell?
it's amazing. I think you mentioned links there, but for anyone, I've seen links on there was we had a TV show with Ben Fogle, and she was
Mhm.
one of his guests on there. But she is an incredible lady, and I think I'll include a link to her things in the notes, as well as your own things, and also
Please
the
do.
other gentleman that you mentioned, so that people can go and look up their things as well, because it but I guess that's the thing as well, isn't it? Like we often think of like our ancestors and in sort of historical context, but actually even our sort of elders that are still alive now have this amazing wisdom that they've gathered over their years, that they're passing down, and now you're sort of the next generation of that,
Mhm.
gathering from them and adding your own observations
Mhm.
to it to hand down. Um, and it is again, it's that sort of reciprocity, isn't it? And this beautiful connection and cycle with everything around you, not just the non-human world, but the human world as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing in, yeah, that there's so many elders alive now, that like there's a phrase we say in kind of the rites of passage work that I do of, we live in an age of lots of olders and not many elders, and it's like, we live in a culture that really values youth. We talked about this
Yeah.
initially of like it's, peak experience after peak experience, and like this kind of fast way of life and this very youthful way of life and this eternal summer. But like, you know, there are elders who want to step into being elders, and it's like we need them and they need us as well to be able to say, like, we need you to step into this role as well,
Yeah.
because they're such a crucial part of our culture. They're such a crucial part of the earth, in the wisdom that they hold, in the life that they've led. And I think that's really like it's a reciprocal relationship as well, with um with all the stages of life towards elderhood as well. Like, what do we want of our lives when we grow old, like, and that's really reflected in how we treat our elders now. Um, but yeah, so thank you for bringing in that. Like, I'm really fortunate to have some really amazing elders in my life, and really fortunate as well to do ceremonial work that like really invites people to step into their elderhood as well, because I just know that we need them. We need them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in because you do quite a lot of ceremonial work, don't you? Both with young people and you're saying now with the elders. Do you find that's an important part for people to partake in? It's something that we don't, I suppose, with the exception of perhaps religion, we don't really have as part of our culture, do we? Predominantly.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I was raised like Roman Catholic, so for me it was such a big thing to kind of return to ceremony.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
still really shocks me that it's such a big part of my life, like, how did this happen? But it's it seemed like the most obvious kind of next step,
Yeah.
whenever you are connected to the earth in this way and you do want like healthy culture in this way. It's like, well, actually ceremony and ritual is so much a core of that, like, how do we come together to mark important transitions in our life so that we just don't continue living without ever stopping to pause and reflect. Um, and yeah, it's been really like, I've learned a lot, like one of my mentors in this work, Rupert Marquez, says that, sitting in the guide's role, it really grows you up. And I I really feel that, because it's a huge responsibility to sit there with somebody holding out their life to you,
Yeah.
and asking for, yeah, like, it seems like a very human thing. We're one of the processes is called mirroring, so we're basically mirroring back to the person what we've heard. They go out onto the land, and the land is the guide,
Yeah. Okay.
the land is the biggest teacher, and well, we're just there as guides in between those stages, like, our role is very small but important. And yeah, like, to mirror back to somebody like the story that they come back with from the land is such a huge, I'm using this responsibility, it's such a huge responsibility, and it's also such a gift, like, to receive something like that from somebody, and to
Yeah.
to witness them like stepping into their life more fully, to witness them, letting go of something that they need to let go of, or celebrating parts of themselves that they've maybe never celebrated before, and like, for all of us to kind of witness each other in our humanness, like, the ceremony that we hold, it's really just about people's stories,
Yeah.
and it's about relationship, and being witnessed in our relationship to life, and I just think that there should be more places in our culture where people are able to come together and witness each other in that way, um like, I come from a family and a culture that would really roll their eyes at that a lot, like I sometimes force my family to like share gratitude before dinner, and they really hate that. But it's so beautiful when I can get them
Yeah.
to do it, like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do it with my partner each day, and it's been a really beautiful act for us, like, and really coming back to like what's important in our life and what are our core values and how is it that we're experiencing life. And then for like my family as well, it's like, well, I know that it's difficult because we haven't been brought up in a way that values like the inner world as much as the outer, but
Yeah.
it's like it's such a connective experience just to witness each other in our own humanity. And yeah, I think that's just for me, like ceremonial work. It sounds like this big thing because, again, growing up Catholic, it's like it's the priest at the front of the church and he's wearing fancy robes and
Yeah.
he's suddenly transformed like this piece of bread into the body of Christ. And it's these huge ritual gestures, and it can be that. And it can also be like a really simple thing, like it can be, yeah, it's just like that
Almost just
intention.
I was going to
Yeah,
say a slowing down, isn't it? Actually, that's really almost
absolutely.
what it is at its core, is just that sort of pause, isn't it? That
Yeah,
pause in them in time to just reflect on where you are, what's happening, and be present. I think you've said that word a few times, and yeah,
yeah,
you can add the layers to it to sort of make it more elevate it and elaborate and things, but actually it is just that momentary, like sort of like you were saying about the gratitude. It's just you have to get present, don't you? You have to just stop and go, oh, hang on a minute, what can I be grateful for? And then
yeah,
you just have a different experience of life, don't you?
absolutely. It's
Yeah,
that deep listening, like, isn't it?
yeah,
Like listening to our internal world, listening to, the land, listening to one another. Like, how do we slow down enough to really be able to hear that,
yeah.
and participate?
And I think that's key, like you said, listening is, once you start to listen, then you have to take responsibility, don't you? And they kind of go hand in hand. And you've said responsibility quite a lot, and and I think it's true though, isn't it? I think we've come through sort of an era and an age where we've kind of handed over our responsibility, haven't we? We've kind of been in a society where it's like someone else has got this. Like we just
Yeah,
have to kind of get up and be busy,
yeah.
and then someone else has responsibility for all the big stuff. And I think that's a message that's coming through more and more, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. Is actually, like, as individuals, like, we do need to take responsibility, but we also, with that, and reclaiming our power as well, and realizing that we're not powerless, that we do have a voice, we do have a part to play, a niche to fill in the world. And I think that's so what your work partly means to me, is creating that space for people to come into that awareness.
Thank you so much for saying all of that. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel, that we have given away our responsibility. And yeah, how do we come back to that? Because I really do trust that people want to do
Yeah,
something, and feel powerless. And yeah, it's like, how do we remember like our power? Like, how do we reclaim like our yeah, our empathic, compassionate selves, like our deep caring selves, and um yeah, like the strength of all of us acting together as one, is like it's so beautiful, it's so important, and it's so needed. Yeah, so thank you so much for all you just said there. Yeah.
oh, well, it's I think, well, it's part of what I love doing. I love speaking to you, because sometimes I like just to be the person that just reminds you how amazing you are as well.
Oh, well,
Because I think it can be hard. I think you've touched on that quite a few times. Like, you've had a not the easiest journey through life, and you've had to really sort of come through challenges and step into that. And I think sometimes it's very important for people to hear that as well, to hear that there is a chance to sort of for healing and for moving on. And there are people out there, like you've touched on your amazing mentors that you've had, but there are amazing people out there that can help you find a better and easier a path and a way to play your role as well.
mm, yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it's there's so much out there, and yeah, again, like I just don't take it for granted that like I was able to find this path, and it is really, really difficult. And I'm sure there are people out there listening who are just like, I want so badly to step into my purpose, like, or even know what that is, like so many of us never had that person in our lives to say, like, this is what I see in you, like that's the gift of kind of reclaiming rites of passage now, is like to try and support youth to step into their lives in a fuller way, and adults and elders, but yeah, it's just like, yeah, there's I want to be able to give people like an answer for like how we find that, but there's no one way, like there's really not. And there's so many things like working against us in lots of ways as well, like I know for some people it's just like a challenge to try and put food on the table for their kids, like, and to be able to do that is such a huge thing. And yeah, I suppose it's just like, how do we, yeah, like feel the responsibility of our times, like,
Yeah.
if we have that ability, to be able to create spaces where people can connect in that way. It's we need to,
Yeah.
I was at I'm really fortunate, there's a place called the Song House around the corner from me. And there's a woman there, and she has organized like Christmas carols with the local Ukrainian people who've moved into the
Oh,
community,
lovely.
and it's so lovely, like, because yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like such a connective thing to do together, to come and sing and just be with each other, and in the awkwardness of trying to learn new languages
Yeah.
together, and in the beauty of like that shared resonance of our voices. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that comes back to like what we were talking about diversity earlier, weren't we? And I think like, there are probably more so now than maybe in many previous generations, people who are finding themselves sort of, in places like far from perhaps where they might consider home, and but actually they have so much that they can offer us as well, that there's so much wisdom and knowledge that they bring from their cultures that we can implement into our own cultures, and vice versa. And it's almost it's such a gift, isn't it? I think it's just like lovely to learn from these people and the experiences that they've had, and what knowledge and wisdom that they have to share.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always think, like for the times that we're living in, it's like we really need to look to the edges,
Yeah.
and we know this from, interacting with the earth, or if people garden, it's like the edges are where there's so much life thrives.
Yeah.
And like for people who have experienced great trauma, who are at the front lines of like climate change, or, political upheaval and war, it's like the resilience of those people, like, we see it right now on the news, like the resilience of people to still stand in the face of oppression, and love,
Yeah,
and
love.
still like,
Yeah.
still be alive and shouting. And yeah, I think we just have so much to learn from these communities. So it's a lot about like bringing those edges into the center, like, isn't it? To really,
Yeah.
as you spoke before, like hearing those voices that are often not heard, whether that's like voices of the land or voices of different communities. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important.
Yeah, it's there's so many layers to it, aren't there? It's like I think it's something that I found with all the guests that I've spoken to, is that just it's part of what I love about nature as well. I think it's a great common ground for bringing people together. It's like there's a commonality in, overcoming language and things. It's just this shared experience, isn't it, that has this great power to help us like bridge those gaps and those boundaries, and
Mm-hmm.
bring us together, um for a way to create a better future for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah. And I run this long program called the Wild Awakening. It's like a 7-part program where people come for like a long weekend a month for 7 months. And a big part of that is kind of like understanding like power and privilege, and examining like colonization and how it's disrupted our ancestral story. And like to me those are really important things to look at, because I can't separate this idea of rewilding with like what happened,
Yeah.
to create a space where we actually are using such a word, And but to me, like being out on the land together, like, engaging in, we might be tanning a hide and learning about colonization. And it's like that co-regulation with each other, like with the natural world, with our hands and our hearts and our heads connected, like in this time of like increased polarization. I just feel like that's such an important space to be created, that people can come together and get it wrong,
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
say the wrong thing, and like just get it out there, and like compost it, or like, throw it into the fire, so that it's like, well, we feel like we have the capacity to like grow and change and hear one another, even if it's things that we don't agree with, and still, find that common ground together, because yeah, we have a lot more in common than we don't, and
Yeah.
I just think that that's really kind of essential in these times, that we're able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think it is really key more and more. There is so much polarization, isn't there, in everything, but and particularly in the climate as well. And I think it creates a lot of judgment and hatred, doesn't it? And it basically shuts down um conversation, like everything, and the ability to co-create as well,
Yeah.
like this, we need to find solutions. And if we're shutting people out of the conversation because we've polarized it so much, it makes it very difficult to find um our way forward. And like you said, I mean, you touched earlier, and it was something that really touched me. And you said, like, you hold on to the belief that most people actually have good hearts. They
Mm.
actually, they don't want to hate, and they just perhaps don't have the skills and the language to express what they're trying to express. And it's beautiful what you said, that having that shared experience on your course and in nature, and allows people to sort of messily try and learn how to express what they're trying to say, and move through that.
Mm. Something I really love teaching is wildlife tracking. Um, and Yeah, I think there's lots of layers to why I love teaching it. Like, I was on the beach this morning and I could see that fox had been there last
Yeah.
night, and like that's such a connective experience, that I remember who I share this earth with, and that they've been here too, and how they were moving across the beach and when they were there and what they encountered, and being able to see through the eyes of, you know, another species. It's not just like crossing these boundaries, or these perceived boundaries of like what you experience and I experience, but like across a species, like, to
Yeah.
develop that kind of empathy is um yeah, I think a really core practice. Um, but also like wildlife tracking, we talk a lot about holding the question, and not jumping to conclusions. So, we'll gather together to look at, if we say take the track of the fox, for example, and like just begin to ask questions around like who and what and when and how, and we're looking at the same thing, but like the power of all of our voices together and all of our questioning together is what draws us towards something, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that we're sitting in mystery together, like we're sitting in this great unknown together, because okay, I can break it down and be like, the fox was going this direction, and I know it's a fox because of this and this, and I love all of that as well, but it's also like there's the life of another being on the other end of this, that has agency of its own, who potentially has, family of their own, has had all of these experiences and encounters, and it like really touches on the magic of being alive for me, like, and the great mystery of being alive. um and I just love wildlife tracking as a medium with which to explore all of these things with people. It's so generous, it's such a generous framework, and we're ultimately like, learning a lot about ourselves as well as learning a lot about the earth and all of the beings that we share the earth with.
Yeah. Oh, it's just beautiful. You took me right back there. Because I lived in South Africa on in the Greater Kruger National Park for five
Bigger
years.
things than
Yeah,
foxes there.
but we did safaris, so obviously like wildlife tracking was quite a huge part of it, and we had some amazing trackers who had just grown up on the land, and the way
Yeah.
they could just read the spoor, and it was it's amazing. It's like there's like the landscape had a whole story for them
Yeah.
to tell, and they had the language to be able to sort of translate it for us. And it's just,
Yeah.
like a little snapped twig or a scuffed bit of ground, and it just,
Mm.
yeah, it's an amazing skill, and it's lovely to hear that that's something that um you teach people, and people have the opportunity to learn as well,
Mm.
and how it feeds in. I love how you said it feeds into like sort of natural curiosity, doesn't it, as well, and just sort of that creative process, I guess, isn't it, of
Mm.
just looking at the world in a different way, and realizing there can be different answers to the same question as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's that wonder and awe piece, isn't it? Like, bringing our attention to, Mary Oliver says, like, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it, and it's like, okay, how do we, yeah, come back to like really giving our attention, like it's such a precious thing that we can give. Um, and like they say that, wildlife tracking was what really formed our brains, like, to be able to look at something like a collection, a pattern of something on the ground and be able to attribute that to like, not just a particular kind of animal, but a particular like individual at a particular time. So it encouraged us to think like spatially and temporarily and symbolically, and like how amazing it is to come back to like this really ancient skill that we still have in us because we're able to, it's the same kind of function that we recognize all of these brands, like we're able
Yeah.
to, we talk a lot about kids being able to recognize more brands than they can tree leaves, it's like that pattern recognition, like to come back to this now as a way of like moving forward with the real challenges that we're facing at the moment. Um, yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess we're sort of getting to the point of probably like rounding up for now, although I feel like I'm gonna have to come back and speak to you again in the future.
Please do. I've loved this.
But I don't know if there's anything else, Lucy, that you just would love to share today. Anything, I mean, you shared so much already, so many amazing words of wisdom and things for people to take away and work with. But just if there's anything that you would like to share, anything else?
Oh gosh, it's been so full. It's hard to even consider one piece. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I just like in that same vein of like the wildlife tracking, I love questions, and I think that there's a Rumi quote that I actually can't really remember at the moment, but it's something along the lines of like loving the questions themselves as you would like lock boxes in your own heart. Maybe people can go away and read the actual quote because I'm butchering
Yeah,
it there, but um I think it's really important now, like as we sit in the times that we're in, that like to be able to sit with questions to me feels very trustworthy,
yeah,
like rather than feeling like we need to have all of the answers or all of the solutions
yeah,
right now, like how can we just be together with the questions of our
yeah,
time and see what emerges from there? Um, and yeah, like observe what response that initiates within you
yeah.
and question what ability you have to respond to that invitation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely beautiful, Lucy. I love that because I think so often in our society we're driven and expected to have the answers, and there's also that sort of sense of failure, I guess, as well if you don't have the answers, and we're conditioned from school that you don't want to fail by not having the answer, so
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
to lead to fear of even asking the question. But there is so much power available in, just like you said, being prepared to ask the question even if you have no idea what the answer is, and just sitting in that space with that question and being open to whatever wisdom might come to you, from whether that's from the natural world or ancestors, or anything, just any spark of inspiration that might come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Lucy. It's been absolutely magical speaking to you today. I've
Thank
really had an
you.
amazing time,
Me
and
too.
and
Loved it.
I will include your links to all your website and your social media. You've got quite a lot on Instagram for people can go and have a look at what you get up to, and find more inspiration. But yeah, it's been a real privilege and a pleasure to speak to you today.
Well, thank you for all your great questions and reflections.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.